Good morning and welcome to the Liverpool Daily News. I'm James Martin and today I'm joined by Dave Comerford. We've got plenty to talk about. The World Cup is back, as too is the Dubai Super Cup, which is now underway. So we'll see Liverpool in action again very soon. Arsenal got that competition underway with a big win over Lyon, who Liverpool will face later on in the competition. But even with Liverpool, back on the horizon soon, David, it's the World Cup that's the big story that returns today after a little break, and plenty of Liverpool interest there. So we've got Alisson, Fabinho, and Virgil van Dijk all in action today. I mean, Fabinho maybe less likely than the other two to play a part, but who do you see progressing out of that trio?
Well, I definitely think Alisson and Fabinho will go through first of all. The thing with Croatia is I feel like even though this is probably what I'd say is the first post-golden generation team for them, in terms of a lot of the key figures in that side now have actually retired from international football, they still look like a very competent side, very sort of like business-like at times, without necessarily being, the highest quality. But you'd probably say so far that Brazil have looked like the best team in the tournament, maybe. Some people might say, some people might look at France instead, but for me, it has been Brazil looking like the strongest. So I'd expect them to get business done in that one. It's probably one of them where it could prove awkward. It could go to maybe extra time or something like that. It might be just a one goal decider, but yeah, fully expect Brazil to get through that one. And then, the game tonight is a monumental one. Very difficult to call. Argentina probably haven't reached the levels that many expected them to. A lot of people saying that they were pre-tournament favourites, and then you've got the Netherlands, who sort of typical Van Gaal fashion. Really, it's like they've not been impressed by them too often, but they have sort of won 3 of their games and drawn the other, and obviously scored, to be fair to them, a couple of excellent goals in their last game against the United States. So I think it might just be shaded by Argentina, that one, but very much looking forward to watching it. And obviously, one of the headlines might be sort of Messi against Van Dijk, but whether it actually pans out that way, I'm not sure, given the amount that Messi roams about, and obviously the Netherlands will be trying to keep him outside the penalty area and actually away from Van Dijk if they can. So that's going to be certainly an intriguing individual battle, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. I imagine Messi will want to roam away from Van Dijk as well. He's obviously an intelligent player, one of the most intelligent players about, and much as it's hyped up as Messi versus Van Dijk, they'll probably both want to have as little to do with each other as possible if their game plans go as intended. But yeah, they're both shaping up to be very interesting matches. Let us know in the comments who you think is going to prevail. They'll both be well worth a watch, and it's interesting as well how they affect Liverpool. We it's Liverpool.com, it's blood red, so we do have to talk about that. It's we mentioned the Super Cup and how that's getting underway. You'd imagine that everyone who's still in the World Cup now is probably not going to make it for either of those Super Cup games. You would have thought. I mean, even Darwin Núñez, who's set to join up with the camp soon, you'd imagine he'd be looking at the second game in that tournament if he's to be involved. So do you think anyone who does get through in this next round of fixtures is probably going to be looking at missing out on, well, the Manchester City game and then maybe even the Boxing Day game as well?
I think it's definitely a possibility. I remember writing about it before the tournament. There was quotes from Virgil van Dijk saying, we're going to need a break. And I suppose you could look at it and say, timeline-wise, they should be fine because you've got sort of the final on the 18th of December, something like that. And then obviously Boxing Day coming back in the Premier League slightly before that against Man City. But we can probably assume that anyone who gets to the final is going to be out of the equation for that one, certainly. And then you got the Villa game, and it's like, well, there is a decent window there. Even if a team wins the World Cup, they probably have time to, in theory, go to their country and celebrate, and then be back for that fixture. But yeah, it's one of them where do the club decide that they're going to give them out, some time off? I think Núñez is getting a week off, and he only played obviously the 3 games with Uruguay. So my hunch on that one would be that they would miss the Villa game, yeah, and people who reached the sharp end of the tournament, not so much out of the timeline, but just giving the players a rest, really. And it's interesting how that is going to be a challenge for Liverpool in terms of who it might be. You know, there's certainly some players at the tournament who they could probably cope better without, if you know what I mean. But it's an important game for Liverpool, I feel, when it does come around, because, you know, if Liverpool don't manage to win, then this whole idea that the season will inevitably ramp up for us in the second phase will kind of, I don't know, the optimism will dissipate pretty quickly if Liverpool lose or draw against Aston Villa, which should be a very difficult game, you know, with the new manager and the atmosphere and all the things like that. So, yeah, it's not ideal, and it's one of them, isn't it, where we had a relatively small group of players going to the World Cup, but all of them really had a chance of getting towards the sharp end of it, and that's how it's proved, really, with all but one in the last 8.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for sure, and it's maybe means that some of the Liverpool contingent who aren't at the World Cup will be looking at today's games a bit more closely than they otherwise might have been. I suppose with Alisson, you've got Kelleher maybe eyeing up a start. I mean, you'd think he's pretty much nailed on for the Man City game. That's his competition anyway. But then, you know, maybe he fancies an outing on Boxing Day as well. Then you look at Fabinho. You know, there's plenty sort of looking to get a place in that midfield, especially with, you know, if Henderson progresses later on as well, then, you know, you're looking at potential youngsters looking at a chance. Even someone like Bajcetic could be thrown into the mix. And then, of course, Van Dijk. You've also got Konate away. He'll play England tomorrow. So, you know, you probably, if you're Joe Gomez and Joel Matip, you're looking at that and thinking maybe we get a good couple of starts here. So, yeah, the Liverpool squad look, you know, on the whole, in a decent shape to deal with it. I suppose Calvin Ramsey as well will maybe be eyeing up England tomorrow and thinking if Trent, you know, he's not playing much, but if he does get a little bit of a rest after the tournament, then maybe that's a chance for him. So I suppose you would say, even with these kind of problems that Klopp's looking at, I suppose it's opportunities for others.
Yeah, definitely. And Ramsey's definitely one of the players you'd look at and say, we'll have an opportunity, not just to maybe play minutes, but also to make an impression in these games in Dubai. Lyon and AC Milan, high-level opposition. You know, you'd think he'd probably start both of them, even if he isn't going to play 90 minutes both times. And then, you know, if he plays well in those two matches, it's like he's demonstrating to Klopp that he can be more than someone who just plays in the cup competitions for the remainder of the season, and can maybe be someone who plays a role in more meaningful and more difficult games. So definitely a chance for him. Kelleher too, of course. But yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of just dawned on me now, I suppose, that it could be a difficult situation for Liverpool. Not only in defence, because obviously, you know, Van Dijk's the leader in that department, but defensive midfield too. You know, if Fabinho and Henderson get through these games at the weekend, then it probably is hard to imagine them figuring against Aston Villa, because obviously the team who loses in the semi-finals is still effectively there till the end of the tournament, because I believe that the third place playoff is the day before the final anyway. And then, you know, who starts in that number 6 position for Liverpool? Is it like a youngster like Bajcetic, like you say, or is it someone who's maybe slightly out of position? So, yeah, it's one of them where not many players, but important players for their countries, you know, players playing for high-level teams, and also, you know, that maybe positional spread isn't ideal, you know, heavily focused now, I think, towards sort of the defensive side of the team. So that could create some issues potentially against Villa. But, you know, Liverpool won't be the only sort of top side dealing with their key absentees, whether that's in the Premier League or any other leagues.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Thiago play as the number 6 in the past. Of course, he was controversially not picked for the World Cup. Maybe Spain regretting that now. So he's maybe one who could fill in there. I suppose you've got Keita at a push. You wouldn't really want him as a 6, but he's now back. He could feature for the first time since the Community Shield. But yeah, back to the World Cup. We've got Bruce in the comments saying Croatia will need to be organised and score first to have any chance. Chasing a game against Vinny Jr., Rafinha, Neymar isn't ideal. I think that's probably a bit of an understatement, but it's certainly true. But I think you made an interesting point about Croatia. You're right that it's sort of a post-Golden Generation tournament, but they've got some new youngsters coming through as well, some interesting players. So it'll be interesting to see how they get on. It'll be a good sort of acid test of whether they can sort of stay the course or whether they're a team who will sort of have that golden generation and then fade. So yeah, that's probably an interesting narrative in that one. But then I suppose linking it back to Liverpool, you've got the potential to set up a sort of all Liverpool semi-final clash, if you like. You've got, like you say, it all depends on whether Van Dijk can get through against Messi and against Argentina. But if he can, then you'll have the case of Alisson and Fabinho up against Van Dijk, which would be certainly an interesting one to watch from a Liverpool perspective. Meanwhile, on the other hand, you've already got that kind of thing set up in the quarterfinals, England-France. You've got Henderson against Konate. You throw Trent in the mix as well, even if he's maybe the least likely to feature of the three. I suppose Konate is, he's played a bit. I think he's started two now. He's either started one or two, but he's featured. Yeah. So there's a decent chance we could see him. So yeah, do you think there's a risk that has any kind of effect on the Liverpool camp? I suppose we saw it a bit with the African Cup of Nations and Mane and Salah. Or do you think it's just a bit of fun from a Liverpool perspective, and going out or progressing would have the same impact on sort of psychological state regardless of who they go out to?
I don't think it's going to foster any sort of division, but I do think that one thing that's been underestimated with this World Cup is what happens to a player who does experience, sort of heavy disappointments. And we're at the stage of the competition now where, it's going to be pretty heartbreaking for whoever goes out, really. I think the certain players who are better able to deal with it than others, but even someone like Van Dijk, you'd say, is sort of very kind of resilient. As the leader of his country, he will take a lot of the flack, I suppose, if they do go out of the competition. And I think that's what you have to bear in mind is we saw with Salah last year getting to the AFCON final, and granted fatigue played a big part in what happened afterwards, but it was also, I think, the psychological blow he took of trying to lead his nation to that trophy and losing at the very, very last hurdle in that final. So these things can take time to process, and players aren't going to be able to just robotically move on from it and get back into club mode. So there is definitely a sort of mental element at play as well as the sort of physical exertions of playing at the World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth bearing in mind that a lot of these players are, if not on their last chance, then pretty close to it. I mean, Van Dijk is still in his prime, but by the time the next World Cup comes around, he'll be 35. So it's touch and go. You'd say the same. I mean, Henderson is almost certainly on his last World Cup, may even be his last major tournament. Time will tell. So, I mean, Alisson may be a bit different. Goalkeepers can go on for longer, but there's always plenty of competition for the number one shirt for Brazil. So, yeah, it's just another element of the potential heartbreak of going out of the tournament. I think you're right. I think maybe that has been underestimated. It's not like as soon as the players are back, everything will click back into gear. But from Liverpool's perspective, that's what Dubai is for. Working with the players who are there, making sure they're ready to go when the season gets underway, and then hopefully the players coming back from the World Cup can be integrated a bit more gradually. But the key for Liverpool, of course, is a quick start. They had some momentum going before the World Cup. They'll need to build on that to achieve their aims this season. All of the cups still to play for, top four still very much to play for. We'll keep you up to date with that quest and with all of the news on Liverpool here on Blood Red and over on Liverpool.com. Be sure to check that out throughout the day. For now, thanks very much for watching, and we will be back very soon.